The best lessons in life are often learned outside of the classroom. That's where all the action happens. That's where the rubber meets the road and the hard knocks knock some sense into you. But did you ever wish you could get those lessons without all the fuss? Sign up today and get your first week free. You can cancel at any time.
Ready? Go.
Hi, I'm Rick Brimacombe of Brimacombe Capital, and on behalf of Lessons from the Garage, welcome to our May podcast, The Federal Government as an Investor in Your Business. Lessons from the Garage provides insider learning for entrepreneurs. Think of Netflix for business owners and leaders trying to grow their companies. There are over 200 videos and will be over 300 videos by the end of the year. You can go to our website to learn more at www.lessonsfromthegarage.com and sign up for a 7-day free trial. Check it out. Lessons from the Garage is an effort brought to you by the Network Connect. The Network Connect is a 6-year-old platform created to connect investors, companies, service providers, and act as a catalytic gateway to fuel business growth. To learn more about us at the Network Connect, go to www.surprisingly.thenetworkconnect. Our events and contacts have helped companies raise millions of dollars, and our monthly newsletters reach thousands of investors and referral groups, and then tens of thousands of business contacts. Before we get to today's podcast, I'd like to first say thank you to our sponsor, the Defense Alliance. Defense Alliance accelerates commercialization for technology products and services and contributes to regional economic development by supporting small businesses in the upper Midwest. You can find out more about them at www.defensealliance.com. Without the generous support of the Defense Alliance, events like this wouldn't happen, so please support them to the extent that you can. Likewise, let us know if you'd like to learn more about sponsorship opportunities with Lessons from the Garage. Again, think of Netflix for entrepreneurs and business owners. The Network Connect acts as a catalytic gateway for connecting folks, and both of those businesses have been up and running for a number of years and served a number of entrepreneurs and business owners such as yourselves. Our podcast schedule coming up is going to cover a couple of different categories that are of interest to you folks out there. One is doing business overseas. Another is kind of basic legal issues facing entrepreneurs and folks getting their businesses up and running. And then another podcast on basic accounting information, just basically trying to create a foundation for you folks trying to grow your companies. Today's speaker is Chip Langdon, Executive Director of the Defense Alliance. Chip is going to be talking with us today about the federal government as an investor in your business. The U.S. federal government is arguably the largest venture capitalist in the world and can be an excellent source of funds to advance commercialization of new technology and to enhance business development, especially for small businesses. And for you folks trying to finance your company, this is one area that is certainly an exceptional opportunity that is underutilized, and then also the financing itself is non-dilutive. So from that standpoint, it's a great tool. Today with Chip, we're going to cover the following. We're first of all going to define what it means for the federal government to be an investor. We're going to give an overview of the various market opportunities provided by the federal government, talk about a number of different types of funding that is available. We're going to give everybody kind of a path to start to do business with the government and to market to the federal government. And last but not least, we're going to cover intellectual property and commercialization issues. Before I turn things over to Chip, just a couple of items on his extensive and very colorful resume. First of all, Chip and I have interacted several times over the years. He's a great guy and would be happy to connect with any of you listeners out there. So when we finish up, please feel free to reach out to Chip directly, or on the YouTube channel, you can post your questions and Chip will follow up with you. Likewise, if it's a question directed more towards me or any of the other experts at Lessons from the Garage, you can do that too, and someone definitely will follow up with you. Chip is a 20-year Navy veteran, aviator, and commanding officer. He has been with the Defense Alliance since 2004. As I mentioned, he is the executive director. And then he also is involved with a number of other organizations, things that you might have crossed paths with or had interactions with in the past. Clean Tech Open, Robotics Alley, the Cybersecurity Summit, and then he's also done a variety of things for the University of Minnesota. Again, a reminder about questions that you have. Post those on the YouTube channel or reach out to us at the Lessons from the Garage. With that said, the best place would be through the YouTube channel and right here, and we will respond to you. One thing that's interesting about the Defense Alliance is while they are interacting with the government and providing you, the entrepreneur and gentleman or woman trying to grow your business, a liaison to the government. They actually are a for-profit enterprise and not a nonprofit enterprise. So they put on their business cap just like you do. They're here to help your business. They're funded by the government, so can provide the vast majority of their services free to you. That is pretty much what I want to tell you about CHIP and what we're doing here today. Again, remember to post those questions and we will be happy to get to you. So with that, let me turn it over to Chip. And Chip, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Rick. It's great to be here. We've been involved with the Network Connect for several years now. It's a fantastic network, and it's an honor to be here to share some lessons with the membership and the different types of businesses that are out there. I was reminded during your introduction when you said I was a 20-plus year Navy vet. When I retired and came up to Minneapolis, I actually went to Lockheed Martin when it was big here in the Twin Cities and met with a woman who said, well, there's really nothing for you here. I'll get you a job in D.C. And I explained, well, I'm someone who married a Minnesotan, so I'm here to stay. And she said, you know, there's nothing for you here, but there's this little company over on the Midway that needs some help with their defense contracting. Why don't you go help them start their defense division? And I said, well, I don't know anything about defense contracting. I was an operator. I flew for 21 years in the Navy. And she looked at me and said, they don't know that. So I went over there and sure enough was hired and realized that they didn't know that. I also discovered that there was really no place in town, really in this region, the upper Midwest, that could teach people how to do defense contracting. And so that was essentially, that realization was the genesis of the Defense Alliance. We said, look, as a small business, we're learning things about how to do this, how to connect to the government, how to get research and development funding into small business to really fund commercialization efforts. And we should really share these lessons. So we created Defense Alliance back in 2004. And we received federal funding for that in 2011 and have had that essentially ever since. So now I am a quasi-expert in federal contracting. Didn't really want to be, but here I am. And I'll explain why maybe I say I don't want to be. It's a very complex process, but potentially a very lucrative one for small business. So as Rick said, our topic is the federal government as an investor for your business. And I really want to cover 5 major elements. I'll give you an overview of the federal government, talk about some opportunities that are out there, types of funding that is available, and how to get started and some of the best practices involved to succeed and resources to help you do that. So a little bit about the Defense Alliance itself first. As Rick said, we're really about advancing technology commercialization. Yes, we're about connecting to federal funds. Yes, we largely focus on defense because that's the largest part of the federal government by far. But we really care about small business generally and advancing technology, and we do that in myriad ways. There's our mission statement. I won't read it to you. Rick covered it, but essentially we want to meet with any small business that has really cool, innovative technology that needs to get advanced with a little bit of help. And a lot of times that involves venture capital, angel investment, something, just some seed money to get that moving. We're experts in that endeavor. We really do 3 things. We do business development. That's meeting one-on-one with companies. This is our kind of 3-step approach to how to do that. We can meet with you, assess 2 things essentially. Your business readiness, how eager are you to really advance your technology through federal funds in our case, and number 2, your technology readiness. Do you have something that truly, if we look out 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, has significant commercialization potential for the federal government or the Defense Department and commercialization beyond that? So we'll set up a kind of a path for you and how to achieve that, and then build some metrics around that so that we're not just doing things for activity's sake. We're actually targeting goals for you as a small business. Secondly, we do economic development, and I won't dwell on this, but suffice to say that because we're funded by the Small Business Administration, we care about regional economies and advancing regions in terms of their growth in jobs and contracts. We also do what we call supplier diversity, and that's because we're with the federal government largely in our focus. Prime contractors have to be concerned about things like how much of their contracts are being given to suppliers that are woman-owned, hub-zone, veteran-owned companies. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. So we're experts in that field as well in terms of really bringing a solid supply chain to the federal government. As I said, we're funded by the SBA, the U.S. Small Business Administration, as a regional innovation cluster. And because we're military, it's always fun to talk about clusters, but in this case, it's a good thing. And in that endeavor, we really, as Rick said, focus on small business commercialization, and we can do that largely for free, at least initially with small businesses. Our membership actually is in 34 states because we've been around so long and we like to go to places like Hawaii in the wintertime. But with our latest round of funding from the SBA, we're really focused on North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. And that's not to say we won't work with companies outside of that region, but this is our primary focus area. We're also looking at businesses, technology businesses mainly, that are in rural communities and that, oddly enough, have a connection with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or USDA. This is a new focus that the SBA has thrown our way. Again, not a limiting factor for anybody else, but we're just focusing on that as well. And then we're eager to find companies that are in places like hub zones and opportunity zones. If you don't know if you are, we can help you with that as well, because that may help you advance yourselves in the federal market. Here's the bottom line. This is how the government buys things. So,
Boy, that's not very complicated.
study this. This
Yeah.
is
There's a test at the end, right?
Yeah, this is why nobody knows how it works. This is why it takes 15 years to get an F-35 fielded. It's really, really complex. The federal government values two things, essentially: risk avoidance and fairness in the contracting world. Those two things, to speak bluntly, don't do the taxpayer any favors. And we end up with this process that's really, really complicated. We call it the process. So what we want to do is help you navigate this. We're really good at it. But do we fully understand it? Nobody does.
Can I ask a question on
Yes,
that?
sir.
The process. Obviously, there's a lot of variables that impact it and such, but rule of thumb to work through that process, you say at the minimum it's going to take this much, and boy, I've seen it take that much.
For a small business?
Yes.
And of course, it really depends on your technology, where it is in the process, what you're trying to do. Are you taking an idea on a napkin to something in the field, or do you have something that can be modified slightly? But in general, I would say if you're just getting started in the federal procurement process, you have to assume it'll take at least 1 to 3 years.
Okay.
On a
That's
good,
helpful.
on a good note.
Thank you very much.
Yep. This is our team. I won't go through who these folks are, but they're the best in the business, and we all have a place in this scheme here. We'd love to help you. Okay, let's talk about the federal government as an investor. People look at Uncle Sam and don't think of Uncle Sam as investing in things, although you'll hear politicians say taxing people and spending it is investment. But for small business, I like to say that the federal government really is the largest venture capitalist in the world, especially for small businesses that are looking to commercialize a technology that they're looking out maybe a year, maybe 3 years, maybe longer, and they really need investment to get it there. For those of you that work with small businesses like that, Network Connect is full of those companies. You know how challenging it is to find investors, convince them that this is the Holy Grail and it needs to get funded and out the door. And even if you can do that, those companies, generally speaking, I think always, take a stake in your company in some way. The federal government does not do that. It's a fantastic concept. You name it, the federal government develops it from scratch, from the idea on a napkin all the way to fruition. Or they can take something that's on the shelf, modify it for their purposes, and then hand it off to you further for commercialization for your own markets. And most importantly, not only do they develop it, but they buy it after the fact. The federal government is full of agencies that develop things from a technology perspective. Very few of those agencies actually buy at the end of the process. Department of Defense, or DoD, is one of those that does, and that's the largest pot of money. It's a competitive process, and I referred to this earlier in the sense that because it's competitive, the federal government is spending your tax dollars. They have to compete solicitations or requests for proposals, RFPs, in a competitive way. And what that means is it's fair, but as I alluded to earlier, it takes a lot of time. And the government doesn't always buy the right product because it's trying to be fair and equitably parcel out where the money is going. So just something to be aware of. It's a venture capitalist that has to compete who it invests in. Be aware, too, that when you look at the federal government, increasingly, actually, the federal government itself, for the agencies they're in, USDA, Department of Defense, Commerce, SBA, they don't necessarily buy things themselves or invest themselves. They parcel out their ability to do that with third parties. In the defense world, that's been done for many years with the big prime defense contractors, as you know, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, some of those. But there's also increasingly other parties that have what's called OTA money, other transaction authority money, that has been handed out in blocks to organizations like Georgia Tech comes to mind, academic institutions. There's other groups that focus on industry areas that have been afforded the ability by the federal government to spend their money on their behalf, and they leave it up to those third parties to do the vetting in the competitive process. A lot of people look at the federal government and say, well, yeah, it's not only is it hard to work with, but I have IP, I've got intellectual property, I've got proprietary information that I want to protect. I don't necessarily want the government to take it. The good news is with the federal government, they don't take it. They may take it initially, but you always get it back in the end after they get what they need, which is usually a pretty rapid process. So this precedent started essentially in terms of it being codified with President Reagan in the 80s, when he really made the long-term investment strategy of the federal government for technology a firm process, and that was with the SBIR program, Small Business Innovation and Research. And I'll talk about this later in the program, but SBIR money is long-term research, and Reagan said, or his administration said, if we're going to do this, we want to make sure that companies that receive SBIR research and development money for their commercialization process actually get to commercialize their product. So we don't want, as a government, to lock things up. We want to get what we need and move them quickly down a commercialization path. The feds want you to be a viable, long-term innovative supplier, and that's why they decided to do that. You do need a release from the program manager for most research and development projects that are funded by the feds, but that oftentimes comes very quickly in the process, with the SBIR even as quickly as a year into the program. So the money for the projects you get for a program like SBIR from the government, it really is the money that you are using not just to develop that product for DoD or whatever agency, but also for you to work on your commercialization path. The only exception is you can't use that money for marketing efforts, to market your commercialization efforts. So again, the neat thing about the federal government as an investor is the commercialization path is a mandatory part of the proposals that they request from you as a small business. They won't work with you unless you have a viable path to work and sell your product or service beyond just what the feds need. So to sum this portion up, I'll say it's the federal government, working with the federal government is really hard. It's really, really hard. Again, I've been doing this for 15, 16 years since I retired from the military. I still don't fully understand the process. The good news is the opportunities involved are vast. If you are a small high-tech company that's doing just about anything technology related or service related, the government develops it and buys it. And there's a ton of money right now, especially in the Defense Department. As most of you know, it's the largest defense budget we've ever had in our history. As a side note, it's actually the lowest, near the lowest in terms of GDP, percentage of GDP, which is kind of a neat figure.
Yep.
And not only are the opportunities vast, but there's help available from places like Defense Alliance, and a lot of times that help is free, also funded by the taxpayer largely. I do want to cover some federal priorities. Again, this is very high level, but in 20 minutes or so, we don't have that much time to go into detail. I just want to give you a flavor for what the current administration, the federal administration, cares about. Every presidential administration comes in. It takes about 2 years for the new president's priorities to filter down, and the White House does largely drive science and technology policy, and especially for R&D spending. So we're about 2.5 years in, and these priorities are becoming very clear. Energy independence is huge, and I won't belabor these. A lot of these don't apply to some companies, obviously, but if you have related systems that corroborate with some of these priorities, take a look. Number two, be looking for adjacencies. The feds may be funding energy, but as you all know, there's a lot of things surrounding energy. So if you have supporting systems that apply here that can help you commercialize your product elsewhere, something to think about. Number three, support for rural businesses. Again, the Trump administration has talked about the forgotten regions in this country. This is filtered down into our contract specifically. We're looking for small high-tech companies that are in rural areas. Number four, we talked about commercialization paths when there's an R&D contract from the feds. It's always been there, but there's an increasing emphasis on that now and programs to help you get to commercialized product. The next two relate to foreign trade. Because of the trade imbalance, a lot of contracts are geared toward, do we have technology that can ensure more fair trade outcomes? What that really means is, do you have something you can sell overseas as well? And number six, you as a company, can you get foreign investors to invest in your company or in your products? The federal government is also, this is commerce largely driven as a department, but they're looking at research and development programs that contribute to the national technology base itself. So things like additive manufacturing, advanced processes, enabling technologies are getting more emphasis now, and R&D money directed towards them. The government is beginning to get out of things like regulatory affairs, especially in areas like EPA, as a lot of you know. So they're looking for public-private-led initiatives that can take over that role for the federal government. Support for entrepreneurship is big, so if you're a startup company, this is a great time for you to be in business, looking for programs that support you at the federal level. It's increasingly likely. And actually the state of Minnesota, I know there's other states involved here, I assume, in this audience, but
yes,
the state of Minnesota is starting to turn around its direction as far as helping entrepreneurs. The state was probably going to be investing in that with this current session.
Yeah, and the lessons from the garage and the Network Connect probably, like you, heavy dose of the upper Midwest with a few other spots, but it's not just a Minnesota or Twin Cities based entity.
Yep. Fantastic. And then finally, Made in the USA is a big priority under this administration. So most of you, I think that's really good news, right? So start putting that on your marketing material and move forward with that. Okay, what are the market opportunities in the federal government, and how do you find out what they are? There's a lot of ways, and again, we don't have time to delve into it, but number one, be with the customer. You know, if you're building something you think can be used by a soldier in the field, water purification device, for instance, and you'll see later in this program I talk about the water market, because I was thinking about that recently, and I brought that into this presentation as a case study. Be with the customer. Get out in the field. We're not close to bases here, but we have National Guard all over the place, and they're operating. Find out, in this case, what does the DoD need for water purification systems in the field. The DoD, Department of Defense, and the federal government more broadly is a treasure trove of business intelligence. If you're in a market sector looking at what your competition is doing, if you're 3M or Ecolab, you're trying to find out what one or the other is doing, it's hard to find out. But with the federal government as a customer, they give away everything. And even on the defense side, we don't hide things very well at all. Google is your friend in this case. There's a lot of market intelligence you can find out there. And of course, depending on the market you're in, trade groups and professional organizations abound for the federal government. In this case, we are talking defense really as a case study again. Be looking for those opportunities to get with other companies that are selling to this customer. Trade groups are a great way to do that. But the best place to go look if you have keywords, and again, I was looking at water as an example, water technologies, is the federal marketplace, which is Fed Biz Ops. And for those of you that have looked for opportunities in the federal market, you know this is a pretty cumbersome website. But everything is out there, past, present, and even some future opportunities. So take a look at this. There's some tips on how to use this website. This is your clearinghouse for all things federal opportunities.
Hey, Chip, before you move on, Fed Biz Ops OPS, or two P's in there, just for our listening audience at home.
Two P's.
Two P's.
Yeah, I know because I looked at my screen. So.
Fed Biz Ops.
And you can see here, in this case, I did a quick search on water and purification. And like any search engine, there's tips on how to do this. This revealed recently 47 opportunities that are active right now in water. And then I did a search on just water without any qualification. 2,800 opportunities totaling $280 billion, the average opportunity being $98 million for a contract. So if you don't think that the federal market is a lucrative place to go looking for opportunities, think again. So again, just in the water example, among those 2,800 opportunities, here's topics that the federal government is seeking innovation and answers for. And a lot of this is research and development, early stage, venture capital type investment by the feds. Okay, what is the type of funding that's out there? There's essentially 4 pots of money or types. And again, this is hugely oversimplifying everything. And I'm doing this in the Department of Defense context because it's easy to codify that. But all the other agencies in the Fed largely line up in the same way. Research and development money is 3 to 7 year to fruition type money. The idea on a napkin to fielding the product is about a 3 to 7 year time frame for the feds. The main program for that is Small Business Innovation Research, or Small Business Tech Transfer at Universities, STTR. Great program for startup businesses that really are looking to move their technology, prove a concept. It's competitive, but not that hard to get the money. And we can teach you, tips of the trade to really succeed in that market. Cooperative Research and Development Agreements, or CRADAs, and to some degree, broad agency announcements, BAAs, are out there as well. Don't worry about these acronyms. Defense Alliance is here to help if you need to go into this in depth. So that's the long-term funding. There's also development funding, the D of R&D, looking at technology that's maybe 1.5 to 2 years away from really being fielded and used. You just need, like I hear a lot of investors say, God, if I just had $3 million more, I could do X. That's this type of money. That's the Rapid Innovation Fund, which I'll cover in a minute, and broad agency announcement type dollars. And then there's the off-the-shelf. The government goes shopping with a credit card. And by the way, some government buyers have an impact credit card. They can buy something for $25,000 or less with the drop of a hat. And then the fourth is kind of urgent. In the defense environment, urgent technology, urgent development is 90 days. Things like the Rapid Equipping Force, other transaction authority, and there's some other programs where you can fund technology that's really close to being fielded. You just need a little bit more help. So here's an example of searching SBIR for water. Recently there was 12 matches, everything from animal research to cancer research related to water technologies. If you do get into this search mode, make sure you know what your NAICS codes are. If you don't know what NAICS is, look that up. North American Industry Classification Codes. And I mentioned the Rapid Innovation Fund. Again, just an example of what kind of money is out there if you're looking to move technology in 18 to 24 months and really get it into a commercialized state. You can ask for up to $3 million. This program happens every spring. Just some award statistics. I won't go into detail, but it's competitive. You'll see in fiscal year 17, there at the bottom there is that this is just for the Navy's Rapid Innovation Fund, 621 entries with 26 contract awards. So that's pretty competitive, but we can help you navigate that. And just a couple examples of technology that has been fielded through the Rapid Innovation Fund. Everything from something really simple like a wheel assembly to, in this case, anti-jamming of GPS. If you want to find out who your competition is, who's winning contracts in your technology area for the federal government, who's investing or where they're investing, usaspending.gov is a relatively recent website that is, again, a treasure trove of business intelligence. You can find out where the government's spending. And because it's public money, they will give out not only the company names, but contacts within the company. If you want to contact folks, figure out how they are taking
And
your
that
lunch.
again was usaspending.gov?
Yes. Okay, what's hot in the market? Again, this is oversimplifying things, but that's all we have time for. There's a lot more than these areas, but these just come to mind. If you're into cybersecurity, money is almost unlimited now. Power and energy systems, advanced manufacturing, food security and bioterrorism, funding infrastructure and smart technology. This administration may end up with a $2 trillion infrastructure spending bill. We'll see if that happens. But there's going to be all kinds of contracts flowing down from that. AI and machine learning, and even things like technology and agriculture are getting hot. The feds wants its technology to be a lot of different things better, right? If you have a better mousetrap and you're convinced it's better, go shopping, because this venture capitalist has got money to make things better. They want things to be lighter, and this was done again in the defense context. But it's surprising how this flows all through government. They want their products to be lighter. So advanced materials are important. Ruggedization is key. And again, in the defense context, make it soldier-proof. Very hard to do. Efficiency is important. Obviously, long-term savings. Is it commercializable? We've talked about that. Do you have an obvious market for it beyond selling just to the military customer in this case? The feds want its technology to be cheaper than current systems they have. I put this in parentheses because that's a stated goal, saving money for the taxpayer. But if you have something that's notably better that they really want, and you can't get it below that price point, it's not going to be a problem. So that depends. And the same thing with greener. There was a big emphasis on biofuels and solar and wind in the military. I won't say that was lip service, because that actually has brought some good capabilities to the military. But again, I would recommend don't lead with that kind of emphasis. Lead with a better product and all these other things. If you happen to be more green and more efficient and cheaper, those are added bonuses. So that's kind of what they're looking for in terms of the technology. What do the feds want in terms of its businesses? They like small business, which is less than 500 people. If you're a service business, I think it's a different marker. I think it's $17 million annual revenue, something like that. They want its businesses to be innovative. And if you can combine those two things, innovative and small, they love that, because especially on the defense side, the big horses like Boeing, Raytheon, 3M, they're not as innovative as they used to be, And that's why they've turned to mergers and acquisitions and looking for small business, because that's largely where some of the innovation resides lately. The feds want its businesses to be very aware of the requirements. So again, study the customer, know the customer before you get there, so you're speaking their language. Be aware of the customer, we've talked about that. Be invested in the process. Try to understand that horrible diagram as best you can before you get there to show that you're investing yourselves in the process, and be on time. There's nothing worse, especially as a first target of a venture capitalist, if you don't meet their expectations. So pick realistic goals and try to achieve them the first time. Be agile, because the government, like any investor, is a fickle entity. So as they change their priorities, be ready to change yours. Be there. Simple as that. Be there over and over. A lot of people get into this business of the federal government and they say, oh, you know, they sounded interested and they were polite and they said, we'll get back to you, and they never got back to me. And I hear from so many companies that just kept showing up. There's a little wire and cable company here in town that showed up at Oshkosh for 4, 5, 6 years. They just kept showing up and they kept getting rejected. Until the Oshkosh needed something right now for the Defense Department, a major contract to get vehicles for mine-resistant vehicles overseas. And they went to that company and said, we're ready for you. You guys are the only ones that kept showing up. So persistence is really key. They want you to be ethical. I think that goes without saying. They love when you bring one or more businesses to the table. If you can be teamed up with another small business, do that. And again, 2 more things that are in parentheses. If you can be certified, that's helpful. When I say certified, that can mean one of 50 things, depending on the customer. In defense manufacturing, for instance, AS9100 is a certification to be a defense manufacturer. You may not need that, but be looking for those certifications that you can hang out on your shingle to help you. And then, do you have a minority status of some kind? Are you quote unquote disadvantaged? Are you woman-owned? Are you in a hub zone? Are you veteran-owned? I don't view those things as disadvantages, but the government does. And if you have those, bring those to the table as well. Okay, some general tips for success. I'll go through this quickly. There's a lot of opportunity out there, but you've got to be disciplined about it and really be systematic about your searching. You might do a keyword search on your technology today, not see anything. Tomorrow there could be 25 opportunities. That's how quickly these things get turned over in the federal government. Relationships are important, like any new industry. If you're jumping into it, understand the customer and develop that relationship over time. Keep showing up. We talked about that. Know the requirements. If you don't know the requirements, jump in and find out what they are, and then sometimes create the requirements. You may find out that there's something the government needs, but there's no standards around it. They love when companies bring those to the table and say, here's what it should be. And that's a fine line you have to walk between telling them their business or finding out they don't know their business and bringing those requirements to the table. Match the government's investment. This is venture capital. If they're investing in you, be willing to invest something in return. And don't bring just technology, bring solutions and value. That's the marketing side of things, right? You have a better mousetrap, but what does it do? What does it really affect for the customer in the end? Bring small business status and any disadvantaged status, as we mentioned before, if you can, to the table. Understand your failures. Back to that company that kept going to Oshkosh. Why did they reject me? And they kept asking Oshkosh, what can we do better? What can we do better? And reforming their processes. So finally, when that call comes, you're ready to go. And again, make sure that your marketing investment matches your technology investment. Okay, to kind of summarize, how can you be successful with this venture capitalist? You've got to be strategic about this. Don't jump into this game with this investor without understanding that, again, it's really tough, and there's a lot of requirements that come with it, and be invested in the process, because the investor will know if you're not. Develop that relationship over time. Rick, as we talked about, 1 to 3 years, hopefully. Is it worth it? Absolutely. But stick with it for at least 1 to 3 years. And then execute. As I said, be on time. That first contract you get, make sure it's excellent, invest in it yourselves so that it really truly is excellent for the customer. If you're new to government contracting, make sure that you're registered in the system. There's something called SAM, as in Uncle Sam. Very clever, I know. Be careful with this website. Go here exactly as it's typed, because there's people out there that look like sam.gov to register, and you can use that, but it costs $1,000 or something to get registered. It's a private firm, several private firms. You should be able to register as a government contractor for free. A lot of resources out there. Department of Defense has the Office of Small Business Programs. Even if you're not doing defense work, but trying to work with the feds, this is a great website to look at because there's lessons that apply elsewhere. I mentioned FedBizOps, that's fbo.gov. That's the place to go look for all these opportunities. usaspending.gov for business intelligence. There's a PTAC in town, Procurement Technical Assistance Center, provides free assistance on how to do basic contracting. Minnesota High Tech Association is here, does great work. They understand the SBIR game especially very well. And then, of course, Defense Alliance is here for your needs. And in the shameless plug category for our state, my ultimate customer, the Department of Defense, and you may not know there's a USS Minnesota that's out there around the world. It's been in the ocean for about 6 years, I think. The first ship to integrate women in the force in submarines, pretty cool. And this one you may not know, there's a ship building over in Marinette, Wisconsin at Marinette Marine. It's going to be called USS Minneapolis St. Paul. It gets christened and thrown in the water June 15th of this year. And we're hoping it'll be the first ship that gets commissioned in Duluth in the fall of 2020. So again, it launches in June in Lake Michigan and accepted by the Navy in the fall of 2020. Pretty exciting. You know, by the way, there's about 25 suppliers in the upper Midwest that supply that ship in its building. So that's Defense Alliance, and that's using the federal government as an investor for your business. And I'll turn to any questions that you have.
Sure. Well, I have a couple of, Chip, for you, but a reminder to our listeners to please post out on the YouTube channel, and we will make sure we get to those. So first one, dying to ask the question, so you flew a helicopter for a number of years. What kind of learnings or lessons do you have from your flying days that translate to the business world?
Wow. Well, one of my favorite expressions in the Navy was everything is broken all the time, especially on Navy systems out at sea. Helicopters are very complex systems, and it integrates with shipboard systems. And as good as that stuff was, it was always broken. And a lot of times it was obvious that things had been over-designed. So, you know, if you're in this business, look at, be thinking of the end user, the pilot who's out there at, 400 feet over the water at night trying to find a submarine. Make things intuitive and simple for them, and again, sailor-proof. Make it work, and make it work easily. But oh, by the way, it's a lot of fun too. So even when stuff was broken.
All right. On the even when it's broken front and taking the inverse of the fun, how about any harrowing experiences that you'd like to share with us? Again, I'm going down the personal rabbit hole here a little bit, but
things that I can share. Even?
That you can share. Yeah, we don't want to have to, take out our sidekick over here or myself. So we only, stuff that you can share.
Well, the stories get bigger every time I share them, but sure. I think of the time during Desert Storm, coming back to the ship at night, low on gas, always low on gas, so you get low fuel lights flashing in your vision to add to the stress. And even though I was the aircraft commander, the other pilot was flying, and it was 4 a.m, of course. It's always a dark and stormy night. And came back to the ship to do the approach to the back of the destroyer. And it's a little different than a carrier. Carrier, you just set an attitude and crash it onto the deck. A helicopter's a little more finesse involved. And we ended up on the approach, and I was, again, 4 a.m, I was tired and dozing off, quite frankly. And my peripheral vision picked up red on my left side. I was sitting in the left seat. And I just, how the brain works, I just looked out the left window, and what's red out there? and I see red on the water. And I realize at the last minute that was the reflection of our position light on the left side of the aircraft reflecting on the water. And I thought, well, that's odd. I've never seen that before. We must be pretty low. And I look back at the instrument panel, and I see the radar altimeter, which is the actual altitude. And it's going 40, 30, 20, 10, 5 that fast.
Oh.
And we were still about a half mile behind the ship.
Oh.
So I just reached for the power collective, it's called, pulled as hard as I could, even though I wasn't the flying pilot. And we ended up at about 5,000 feet in about 30 seconds, and 0 airspeed, actually backing down, and over-torqued both engines, and basically saved us from hitting the water. But we broke the aircraft, too. And,
Yeah.
but the amazing thing is we came back aboard, and we fixed the engines, and 20 minutes later, I'm watching a movie in the wardroom, eating popcorn and having a root beer float.
And
So, God
not
bless
tired
America.
at that point, a little
No,
wired up with
I didn't sleep for 2 days after that. So,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for your service. I
Yes, sir.
appreciate that very much. Okay, so you started the Defense Alliance in 2004, so it's been 15 years. As you reflect on those 15 years, what was the organization doing back then versus what they're doing now, and how has that changed over time?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we were so focused on learning everything, and we have to understand this process. And it took me probably 3 or 4 years to realize you're never going to learn the whole process. And even when you do, it gets changed by time, by politics, depending on the agency you're working with. And we really started to focus on 2 things: the end user, again, that sailor who's flying out there, or that guardsman who's in Iraq from Minnesota, and he just wants water, and he's by himself, and he needs to purify water somehow. So we focused on them primarily, and then we focused on the small business itself. Those 2 entities are what matter, right? Who's making the product and who's getting it. Mm-hmm. Everything else in between, we'll figure that out, right? But on the small business side, we realized, again, you have to be really invested in that end customer, and you got to be ready strategically to jump into this game. And if you do those 2 things, the government will throw money at you. I mean, quite literally. It's amazing.
So on the off the question a little bit, but what you just said triggered this thought. Assuming that somebody is fully prepared and they are, really packaged up nicely, is it still kind of the 1 to 3 year period? So does it make that much difference how well prepared / packaged they are?
Well, again, it depends. I think what you're asking is, can we get them ready in that 1 to 3 year period? Mm-hmm. Right, that's part of it. Yeah, we can. And I always tell people too, similar to the last point, if you start off on this and you look at it and you go, oh, I've got to have a different accounting practice, and I've got to hire somebody who understands the customer, and it's just too hard, or I'm not going to be able to handle the compliance. If you worry about all that stuff, you're probably never going to jump into the game in the first place. And I've seen companies that just say, you know what, we'll just jump in and figure it out. 1, because we want to help that customer. 2, because we want that investment money. And we'll figure it out as we go. And I'm actually surprised how forgiving the federal government can be. They'll come and audit you, and you may get spanked at some point because you didn't follow an accounting practice. But if you're ethical to begin with, and you can demonstrate willingness to change and fix your systems, I've seen the government be incredibly forgiving. So I think it's worth jumping in that process.
Great. So you're focused on at the Defense Alliance on the 4 states, Upper Midwest, North, South Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin. That overlaps with a lot of what we're trying to do at the Network Connect. But for companies that are kind of in outstate Minnesota or in those other states, given that you're located here in the Twin Cities, how do those types of companies interact with you?
Well, we're here virtually anytime, right? Conference calls, we do a lot of those. We can interact through the website. Phone calls anytime. We are kind of targeting those states sequentially now. We're looking at North Dakota for next quarter.
Okay.
And I think South Dakota with that. But certainly by the end of the year, those 2 states are our primary focus areas. And then Wisconsin probably early next year.
Okay.
Just as a general guideline.
Sure.
And when I say that, we're gonna show up in Fargo and Pierre and Madison initially.
Sure.
Work with the regional economic development folks to see what they have going, where they have gaps, and really find companies that we think are hidden gems that we can work with, that are that balance of business ready and technology ready, that we can really help their commercialization efforts.
Great, great. How about a case study or two? You don't have to give the company or even the product, but more how you worked with them and how you helped them with the process.
Well, actually, we just had an event last week. The Navy outreach to us, which is nice. It's always nice when the customer reaches into the Midwest and says, oh, there might be some innovation out there. There's a lot here. A lot of times the federal government doesn't think to look. But the Navy called us about a month ago and said, we want to come out there and discuss our Rapid Innovation Fund program and tell you what our needs are. Can you assemble a bunch of companies that might be able to contribute to those needs? Absolutely. So we convened 52 businesses at the U of M last week on very short notice. The Navy program manager for Rapid Innovation Technology Needs came and presented. A handful of those companies presented their technologies to them on a one-on-one basis. And again, this is real time. This is just last week. 8 people presented of those 52. And since last week, we have 3 companies that have active opportunities working with the Department of the Navy. So our process is really a facilitator. We tell people the process, how to communicate to this program manager when he comes in. We can set up your marketing material, how to talk to him, what to ask. And then if it leads to a proposal, we'll help with the proposal writing, the lessons learned, all that.
Okay, great. Another thing that you mentioned that I thought was a valuable tidbit of info for the audience and wanted to touch on here. You mentioned having a solution and providing value versus just kind of straight up technology without picking on a particular company or client. Maybe kind of differentiate between those two and maybe talk to how the Defense Alliance helped somebody that you could compare and contrast the differences between those.
Yeah, I think it's, in our case, it's really, communicating what the need is. Because a lot of companies that are uninitiated, they'll look at an opportunity and it's in DoD speak, it's in government speak. We understand what that speak is, and a lot of times we understand what they're really asking for. And it's very market specific. I think of cybersecurity, I mentioned that as a big area right now because the DoD the federal government wants to protect data. And real-time communications is a big issue. And a lot of times the answer with these companies is, here's a patch, here's a software as a service. In that industry, the feds want a fundamental change. I mean, absolutely fundamentally something different than just a software patch. So that's an area where I think we understand that customer, what the need is, a little bit better than an uninitiated customer that's just reading an RFP.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And kind of last question, which will dovetail into giving you an opportunity to kind of summarize your thoughts here for today. For the folks trying to finance their company and looking at different options, typically they think, well, I'll talk to my banker, talk to my friends and family, other possible angel investors, maybe some venture firms, and there are opportunities like with what we've discussed today out there. The fact that it's non-dilutive is critical and of value, of so much value that it's amazing to me as an investor. So kind of to sum things up, maybe talk about, again, the various buckets just to remind everybody, and any closing thoughts?
Yeah, and buckets of money mean types of funding that the venture capitalists call the federal government has.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I'd really think of it in 3 ways. It's, do you want to commercialize something in 3 to 7 years or 18 months, or do you have something to sell right now? Okay. And we're really talking investment. So it's really those first two pots of money, right? So do you want to bring something to a commercial market in a few years or pretty quick? And SBIR, STTR is that first piece, 3 to 7 years. Broad agency announcements is 18 to 24 months. That latter one, the BAAs, broad agency announcements, are nice because there's a lot fewer restrictions. You can design what it is you want to produce to some degree, and you can ask for any amount of money. $3 million is kind of an average,
Okay.
where SBIR tends to be, $500,000 or something like that. It's not that much money. Both are good programs depending on where you are in the process. But I'd say, to your point about the non-dilutive aspect of this, it's amazing. I mean, the federal government is again the largest investor by far in the world in late stage technology and early stage technology and things off the shelf. And they're here to help you. They're not here to take a stake in your company at all. In fact, it's the opposite. The beauty of it is they want you to be a viable supplier, because they were burned back in the 80s when the defense market was really, after the 80s when it was slashed. They were burned by the fact that a lot of these companies had become very defense-centric. DoD now has really helped these small businesses diversify their portfolio. They want viable suppliers. They want you to find commercial markets so that they can come back to you in 5 years and say, remember the thing you made for us? That was pretty cool. Can you make that for us now? And the other thing I'll say is these federal agencies now are really business-centric. They've been told they need to be, number one, and then they've found out over time that small business especially, they're really innovative and they're really agile. They love working with small business. The dark side of that is, don't let them down when they invest in you, right?
All right, and so what is the best way for folks to get a hold of you?
DefenseAlliance.com is probably the best way to do that. We're on Twitter now, which I'm told is important, so I'm on Twitter. I have staff that tell me that. So, but yeah, DefenseAlliance.com. We have a feature on the website called Member Connect. That's a good way to ask questions directly to us.
Great, as well as put questions on the YouTube channel. So, Scott, did we ever get a name for you? Remember a couple of episodes ago, we had a few submissions. Did we land on anything?
We didn't land on any of those. First off, I have to thank my parents for giving me a perfectly serviceable name to begin with. But I've been thinking disembodied voice.
Disembodied voice. All right.
Perhaps it's a good place.
Okay, well, we'll start with that one. So thank you very much, Scott, for your help. Chip, thank you very much for being here. Look forward to more interactions, and thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The best lessons in life are often learned outside of the classroom. That's where all the action happens. That's where the rubber meets the road and the hard knocks knock some sense into you. But did you ever wish you could get those lessons without all the fuss? Sign up today and get your first week free. You can cancel at any time.